Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one warned you about. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, right? I'm Nikki Jupp, the founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-ups to build the right team, enabling them to grow with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, CEOs, and scale-up leaders share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filler, just honest conversations to help you scale smarter. So let's get into it.
A CEO transition is a complex process, and it takes anything from a few months in the best case to a couple of years in the worst case. So it's a slow process. So ideally, the decision to start a CEO transition should be taken when the incumbent CEO still has enough energy to run the business for at least a year, ideally longer.
Today, I'm excited to be joined by Evgeny Shadchnev, a multifaceted entrepreneur, author, and coach whose journey offers invaluable insights into the tech industry and leadership transitions. In 2012, Evgeny co-founded Europe's first coding bootcamp, Makers Academy, aiming to bridge the gap between traditional computer science education and the practical skills desired by the tech industry. Under his leadership and CEO, Makers trained over 1,500 individuals, equipping them with the skills to become software developers and meeting the growing demand for tech talent. In 2024, Evgeny published Startup CEO Succession, a founder's guide to leadership transition, a comprehensive guide drawing from his own personal experience of transitioning out of the CEO role whilst at Makers. The book addresses the emotional, the strategic complexities founders face when considering leadership changes, offering a structured framework for a smooth transition. Beyond his writing, Evgeny now dedicates his efforts to coaching startup CEOs, guiding them through the challenges of scaling businesses and navigating leadership transitions. His approach combines strategic insight, personal development, emphasizing this self-reflection and adaptability. Today, we'll dive into Evgeny's evolution from tech entrepreneur to leadership coach, exploring the pivotal decisions that he made that shaped his career and the lessons he's learned along the way. So let's get into it. So a big welcome, Evgeny. I am absolutely thrilled that you said yes to allowing me to interview you today. A big welcome from me.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Good. So I, as always, want to jump straight in, and I think it's always useful to set the context. So would you take me through a brief outline of the journey that took you from possibly leaving university, but really the journey and the insight that made you create Makers Academy in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to university, gosh, that was such a long time ago. I studied computer science at university, and I was such a computer geek at heart when I was at school. After university, I started working as a software developer. I got my first job as a junior software developer. It was in London. And one thing that became apparent really quickly is that there was a big disconnect between what was required of me in the workplace and what I learned at university. And it was not just because I was a bad student. There were bigger things. There was a real difference between the realities of being a software developer back in 2008 and the contents of my computer science curriculum. And over the following few years, I realized that I'm not the only person in this situation. I progressed a bit in my career. I got some experience. I started hiring other junior developers, fresh computer science graduates. And I could see that there is a big disconnect between the theory from a university and the practice in the industry.
Yes.
And this inspired me to found Makers Academy because we wanted to create a course that would be focused on employment. Right. One thing that I realized after a career as a software developer is that At university, everything was geared towards graduation. You study, there are exams, and then eventually we had an incredible graduation ceremony at the Royal Albert Hall. I went to Imperial College London. It was beautiful. My parents absolutely loved it. I still have very nice photos from the day. But the next day, I was on my own on the job market.
Yeah.
I didn't really know how to find a job. The career service from the university was not terribly helpful. And my insight was very simple, is when people want to get the education, they want to get a job at the end.
Yes.
Not a diploma, not a piece of paper, not a set of qualifications. And they want a signed contract. So we started Makers with a very simple idea, two simple ideas. One is that we will focus on employment. So we will focus on the skills that will get people employed sooner rather than later. And second, our work will not stop until they sign a contract and get a job. So we will not stop when they get a certificate or get to the end of the course and so on. We will support them until they get a job as a software developer. And that was really at the beginning of Makers back in 2013, which was, 12 years ago.
And I still think the philosophy, or I guess the vision that you just explained there, I think sadly is missing in academia, irrespective of subject. I think there is a gap, a requirement that needs filling. I think it's a very interesting challenge, I think, that needs to be addressed, and not just around computer science. So you've got this fantastic vision and you set off on this journey. So take me through what happens. You get Makers Academy off the ground. What next?
Yeah. When we got Makers Academy off the ground, when we first got our traction, we got to our first break-even point and some very tentative profitability, we did it in the business-to-consumer space. So we were making money by helping students to learn to code and get a job, but all the revenues were coming from tuition fees paid by those students. And it became apparent fairly quickly, maybe within the first 2-3 years, that this model is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Or rather, it's not scalable. If we were to continue, it would always stay a small business at a break-even point. For a few reasons which look very obvious in the hindsight. So we had a 100% customer churn. Once something learns to code and gets the job, they will never ever become a customer again.
Yeah.
So that's problem number one. Second, there is a fairly low limit on how much money you can charge to a private individual.
Yes.
Charging £8,000 or £10,000 is borderline possible if you're delivering a lot of value. But doing double, triple, 5 times as much is just not possible. Whereas with enterprise clients, you can go for multi-million contracts as long as you are doing useful work.
Yes.
And so we realized that if we stay in the business to consumer space, we will never scale the business.
Yeah.
And this led to a pivot in around 2017 when we made a big strategic decision to focus on enterprise clients and to stake the future of the business on the B2B side. And today, the vast majority of our revenues comes from B2B, from mid-sized and large companies, including the government, which is one of our largest clients. But while we still have a paid course, it's really a small part of the business at this point.
So how does that work then? Take me through. How does the government become your customer?
Yeah, government has been, or rather different government departments. I think we're working with maybe at least a dozen, maybe more. So we are working across a cross-section of the government, and we have been working for, I think, at least 7 years or so. So it's been a while. But more recently, we just started delivering Tech Track, which is a government program to train over 1,000 civil servants to use digital technologies. And Makers is one of the key partners on that program, delivering software development training. So we just started delivery of this program late last year. It will unfold over the next few years. So it's just the very beginning. And all of this happens in the within the framework of apprenticeships. So we are
Got it.
training, so technically we're training apprentices for the government, and the government pays apprenticeships levy, I imagine, just to itself, that it can then spend on training apprentices to learn how to be software developers.
It's fantastic in so many ways. So there were obviously some markers of success. So you talked about it starting off as a B2C, then you evolved in B2B. What were the sort of either light bulb moments or events that happened that enabled you to have that realization that this is a business that we could really scale?
I don't think there was a single light bulb moment. If anything, when I look at the last 12 years of the company history, it's been just a steady work month after month, year after year. When I was the CEO until 2020, and after 2020, when Claudia Harris, my successor, took over my job. And we've been navigating the challenges and making difficult decisions along the way. But there wasn't a single moment when we could say, okay, now we solved the problem. Now it's just throwing money at the scaling machine from now on. It still takes effort, work, risks, decisions, and the company evolves year after year. But it takes effort as ever.
So it sounds like that there are challenges along the way and decisions to be made, as there undoubtedly are in growing any business. But you made decisions that involved taking things like external investment. What were I guess not the process that you went through, but what drove the decision to, rather than bootstrap, to take external investment? What sources of external investment did you take and why?
So we raised a small seed round to take the company off the ground back in 2013, and then grew on our own revenues for several years until 2019.
Yeah.
And then we raised in 2019, a little bit, if I remember correctly, in 2020, I think, and then a much bigger round in 2022. And another one in 2024. So this coincided with our pivot to B2B.
Yeah.
We started using venture capital to fund our expansion to grow our operations. On the B2C side, our cash flow profile was far more positive because we would charge students upfront, and then deliver the service. So from a cash flow perspective, it was much more favorable. Whereas with the B2C clients, you generally invoice when you deliver the job. And in our case in particular, because training takes so much time, the working capital gap between when we need to start spending money and when we actually invoice for delivering a competent software developer can be considerable. And the more work we do, the bigger this working capital gap becomes. This is particularly pronounced on apprenticeships because apprenticeships the funding lasts for 1.5 or 2 years, depending on the program. And it's weighted towards the completion. So you get the meaningful amount of money when you finish the program. But the bulk of the costs goes into the first few months. And this is not an insignificant gap. Like a couple of years is a big one. So it's all possible to navigate, but it is challenging to grow on your own revenues in this space. So we chose to raise venture funding.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that, actually, in terms of, and also when you're going in the B2B space, you've got the challenge, the larger often the organizations, and please tell me if you think I'm wrong. My experience is dealing with larger corporate organizations that the timescales they take to pay invoices sometimes longer than it is in smaller, certainly B2C. So you've got that on the end as well.
Funny enough, it hasn't been a problem for us.
Oh, that's
as far as I know. Yes, it's true that large companies sometimes have unattractive payment terms, and I think the worst I've seen was 90 days. with one major retailer in the country. But by and large, it hasn't been an issue to the best of my knowledge.
Oh, that's good. Long may that last.
Yeah.
So what about sort of things like pitching? Is that something that you enjoyed? Was it something that you did the majority of that yourself? Or what was it like leading up to those in terms of preparation?
You mean for fundraising?
Yeah.
I hated the process. Fundraising is not my strongest skill. I know that some people are great at it. I know a few people who love it, or at least who claim to love it, but that's not me. So whenever I had to raise, we raised it because we needed to, and of course it's part of the job for any CEO. But it was not the most enjoyable part of the job to go from meeting to meeting and explain once again what we do, what we are raising for, answer all the inevitable challenging questions, data requests, and it's incredibly distracting.
It's time consuming
Yeah.
and it's all consuming as well.
Yeah, it's a full-time job effect.
Yeah.
When founders go into fundraising mode, it can be seen as a full-time job. So
Yes.
when I come across founders, especially solo founders, who are fundraising and running the business at the same time, and they don't have any other co-founder to really rely on, that can be a very tough place.
Yeah, I think often I think burnout comes into the picture during those times in particular. As you say, if you haven't got a team that are in place that can take up that slack, because predominantly it's lots of sleepless nights for people generally. So if we move on to obviously my favourite topic, which is hiring, building a team, tell me a little bit about I'm going to use the word philosophy, maybe strategy is a better word, your strategy and how it evolved around hiring. How did it start in the early days? And then how did that evolve over time as you started to scale?
Yeah. So in the early days, we approached hiring and culture and building the company in a very naive way, with a philosophy that can be summarized as hire smart people, trust them to do a good job, and get out of the way. And there is nothing wrong with this in principle, but I think we took it to an extreme, to the point of trying to even resist introducing management processes, having management positions, and give an extreme degree of autonomy to the team, to the point when it was unproductive or unhelpful, because some amount of structure, some amount of guidance is necessary for the organization, for the team to function. And in hindsight, I think we had all the good intentions, but through my inexperience, because it was the first time I was doing it, through my inexperience, we took it too far, to the point, for example, for about 4 years early in the life of the company, we invited the team to set their own salaries. So so trusting the team to make good decisions extended all the way to figure out how much you should be paid and let the finance team know. And as crazy as it sounds, it actually worked for many years. But
Interesting.
but we eventually went back to much more uh, normal, traditional management processes, because it was working, but it was not working well, in the sense that it was a nightmare to administer for everyone. It was just too difficult to make it happen. Ultimately, people want to do a good job, to know what is expected of them, to be paid fairly and on time at the end of the month. In putting an additional responsibility on everyone, especially on junior people, to look at the market, to do a self-assessment in terms of their skills, responsibilities, deliverables in the last quarter or year, and then make a written decision in terms of how much they should be paid. It was just too much.
Did people find it stressful?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At least some people, not everyone, but some people, yes. Some people loved the process, some people hated the process. So while it was working, it was more distracting than anything else.
Yeah. And I've talking to obviously founders and CEOs, I've had similar feedback around having unlimited holidays. So it being well-intentioned, but it having almost the opposite effect of what was expected. People don't want to offer unlimited holidays because their assumption is that people will want to take lots of holidays. And in actual fact, it was the opposite, that people weren't taking enough holiday, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Same happened at Makers. We also offered unlimited holidays and didn't even count it, but it also led to people wondering, how much can I take? What is reasonable? What are other people doing? It's just so much easier to say that here is our policy, and then, if necessary, be flexible around it.
Yes.
If someone takes an extra couple of days, who cares really? But having a clear and simple and transparent policy is a good idea.
Yeah, I think as human beings, I'm talking in generalizations, not everyone, we quite like to have boundaries. You think about children at a very early age, you want to push those boundaries, and some will push them more than others, but I think it makes us more comfortable to understand what the rules are and the boundaries, and then we can start to ask questions, and as you say, understand culturally where we can push and where we can't push. So that's sort of on the hiring side, and then you said you moved to a more traditional way on the salary side. What about, I've interviewed somebody who worked in Makers as Spencer, and he spoke very emotionally about the impact that Makers had on him from a professional perspective. And really what he was talking about there is the culture that you created inside the business. Now, I'm an absolute advocate that culture is the bit that makes the difference. And if you're linking that with the hiring process, if you're able to bring to life your cultural environment really well in the hiring process, the probability of hiring people that will thrive in your environment exponentially goes up.
Yeah.
When you were making decisions or thinking about culture in Makers, was it something that you consciously thought about? And if so, was that from the beginning all the way through, or was that something that evolved?
It was a bit of both. We did think about it from the beginning, again, inspired by the idea of trusting people, giving them authority, and aligning people around the sense of mission. So I think one of the foundational blocks of our culture was look for people who genuinely care about what we're trying to do here as a company, and then give them whatever they need in order to do a good job. So from the very beginning, we were looking for people like Spencer, who genuinely wanted to make a difference in education, who are genuinely happy to see students to learn to code and get a job, who would sincerely celebrate when they would sign their first employment contracts as software developers. And you could feel this inside the business, because at the end of the day, at the end of the week, just we would celebrate together and stay for the drinks in the office after hours. And also the office has always been in the same space or in the same building as our student campus. So the team running the business and dozens of students learning to code at the same time, it was all one office space, which had its advantages and disadvantages. But the big advantage is the energy of constantly seeing people showing up every month, learning to code from scratch with a dream of becoming a software developer, and then seeing them signing the contract and starting their new job at Deloitte or Financial Times or the BBC or Marks and Spencer or elsewhere. And I know that many companies have a gong in the office that they hit when they make a sale just to celebrate revenue. And we also always had a gong in the office, but we hit it not when we made sales. We hit it when one of our students would get a job.
Yeah.
And then it was a celebration that one more person signed the contract. So that was the kind of key performance indicator, our North Star of why we exist as a business, what we're here for. We're here to help people get great jobs in the tech industry.
So how did you, thinking about that on a practical level for people who are listening? Sometimes it's very difficult for people to understand how they get their hiring right. You talked about particular individual and being able to hire people that are aligned with what you're about. On a practical level, how did you build that into your hiring process?
Trial and error, intuition, reading books, making mistakes, making more mistakes. I wish I had a magic answer to this, but I think hiring is something that every business has to do. And there are libraries of books written on hiring and how to do it well. And yet every manager learns how to do it in their own way when they start doing it. But what I can say is that if for those listening to us and pondering this question, my advice would be study the best practice and don't try to reinvent the wheel. Because people have been doing hiring for decades, for centuries and millennia. There are best practices, there are things that work and there are things that don't work. There are really good books written on all of this. Please study what works instead of trying to reinvent the same thing from scratch, because the chances are that you'll make all the predictable mistakes and learn the same lessons that a lot of people have learned before. Learn from others and innovate where your business is innovating.
Yeah.
But when it comes to hiring, finance, HR, and all other areas which are not the core areas of your business, you do best practice there, and don't try to reinvent how everything is done. Reinvent your core product.
And anything, I'm going to put you on the spot now, any books that you can remember that you read that you'd say to somebody, that one sticks out for me, that was one that we used?
On hiring specifically or
Yes.
business in general? Hiring specifically. We referenced the Netflix culture deck. And I know that the book was written by the same author, I forget her name now. But the Netflix culture deck had quite a lot of influence on our thinking, especially on the idea that, there is one powerful idea there that people need to be given a lot of context, but not specific instructions how to get there. So they need to know what's happening, why it's happening, what's important, and a lot of support and freedom to achieve the results.
Yeah.
And that guided our thinking quite a bit. And while I probably wouldn't agree with absolutely everything in the Netflix culture deck at this point, I'd say it's very much a worthwhile read.
You definitely, and I can't remember the lady's name either. She was their chief people officer, I think, at the time, who'd written that. And just sticking with that topic of sort of books, a couple of people during interviews have mentioned books like The Lean Startup. Are there any business books in general that you would say have impacted you?
Yes, there are, and one of them stands out in particular. The book is called Reboot by Jerry Colonna. I don't know if you can see it. I even have it behind me
I can't, actually.
on a side table. So the book is Reboot by Jerry Colonna. Actually, let me take it.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like.
Yes.
And so the subtitle is Leadership and the Art of Growing Up.
Yes.
And I think this is exactly what the book is about. It's about how to understand yourself as a leader and as a person, and how to become ultimately a more mature human being, which is a consequence, as Jerry says in the book, better humans make better leaders.
Absolutely.
When we work on ourselves, when we sort out our own stuff, when we get insight into what drives us in various ways, when we understand our own shadow sides, to use Jungian terminology, we become better leaders. We just then we start to behave in more skillful way. And this book is incredible. I read it more than once, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone who is working with other people.
Yeah, I always remember as a very young manager in my 20s, the first time, I haven't read that book, but it's going to go on my list. The first time I ever did any kind of psychometric assessment, that sort of self-reflection of how my behavior impacts others. So learning about yourself, and you have lots of aha moments. Yes, I do that, and that's why I do that, and that impacts other people. I think that's absolutely true. I think the more self-aware you can be, the kinder hopefully you will be, both to yourself and to others, and ultimately, as you say, become a better leader. So I think I was going to talk about market and market expansion, but I'd like to stick with that topic of sort of self-awareness and self-reflection. So you grew the business, you and your team, and then there must have been moments when you started to think, what did you start to think about taking that step away, that step down?
Yeah. It was a slow process. I was thinking about it for quite a long time, and in hindsight, for too long, really. The big turning point was actually our shift to the B2B market that I spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
And the reason there is that when I started the business, I started it in the B2C market, training students, helping them to get jobs. And at the time, the entire business revolved around students.
Yes.
And when we made a strategic decision to go after B2B market, it effectively meant that going forward, the customer will be the company rather than the student. This had all kinds of implications, but in particular, it meant that for me on a personal level, it just became not as exciting.
Yeah.
And for various reasons, I was just not as excited to show up in the office on Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings. And work felt more and more like an effort. And it's important to say here that running any startup is hard.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be a walk in the park, even on a good day. But what I also learned is that there is a difference between challenges which are yours to face and challenges which are just not yours to face at this moment. And for a long while, for maybe a good couple of years, I increasingly felt that I love the company, I love the mission, I love our students, but it's not what I should be doing with my life at the moment. So that was the personal side of the situation. But on the professional side, the company also needed a chief executive for the next 5-10 years with deep experience in B2B. Someone who knows how to win multi-million tenders, how to sign big contracts, how to navigate complex environments inside enterprise companies with multiple stakeholders. Someone who speaks the language of big companies at very senior levels.
Yeah.
And that was not my skill set. And more importantly, it was not the skill set that I was looking to acquire. So going forward, the company also needed a CEO with a different skill set.
Yes.
And long story short, around 2019, 2020, these two things came together. And I sat down with my chair of the board and said, we should probably start looking for a new CEO at some point. And about 14 months later, I stepped down as a CEO of Makers, and today I'm a board member, but I'm not running the business anymore.
And how did that feel?
It felt really, really good. It was such a huge weight off my shoulders. I did more or less nothing for a couple of months. I moved from London to Portugal. started retrading as a coach,
Yeah.
and started working with my first clients as a founder coach. So it was a big change in my life. I stepped down as a CEO. I moved to a new country. It was all happening at the time of COVID, so the pandemic also changed everything. So it was a big shift, but in hindsight, it was a really good change because the company got a better CEO. And I can say it with confidence because now I've been watching the new CEO as a board member for the last 5 years, and she's been doing an incredible job. So I'm so happy that she's running the business. I'm much happier than I was 5 years ago,
Yeah.
just doing different things with my life. And this entire experience also inspired me to write a book about CEO succession. I've spoken with probably hundreds of founders who went through a similar transition over the years, and now sometimes I'm helping others to navigate the same change.
And it's quite interesting. So just sticking with the topic, you've written the book, which is very practical rather than it be just theory. I think brave is the wrong word. It isn't a topic that is often talked about.
Yeah.
I think, and your sort of specialism, you're passionate about it and knowledgeable. What are some of the top 2 or 3 challenges that the people that you coach, the CEOs who do make the move like you did, what are some of the biggest challenges that they grapple with that makes it a tough decision to make?
There are a few. Making the decision itself is difficult. A fairly common mistake is that people know that they probably want to step down or should step down, but they are procrastinating on the decision because it feels big and difficult and scary, and who knows, maybe it will become easier tomorrow. So founders tend to procrastinate on it until it becomes obvious that they have to step down. But by the time it becomes obvious that they have to leave sooner rather than later, it's too late to orchestrate an orderly transition, because a CEO transition is a complex process.
Yes.
And it takes anything from a few months in the best case to a couple of years in the worst case. So it's a slow process. So ideally, the decision to start a CEO transition should be taken when the incumbent CEO still has enough energy to run the business for at least a year, ideally longer, and can organize an orderly transition. Because the alternative, if the CEO waits until they feel like they've got no other choice but to step down, it means that the CEO transition will be rushed, which means that there will probably be not enough time to find the best successor, or the pool of available successors will be limited, or the costs of doing all of this will be higher than necessary. So probably the biggest mistake is that people step down a little bit too late, and they should do it sooner rather than later if they're going to do it at all. Another common mistake, probably just equally as common, is that after founders step down as CEOs, they don't get out of the way of the new CEO. They hang around, and either with a formal role or in an informal role, or one way or the other, they continue to exert influence on the business. And this is almost always a lose situation. Because the incoming CEO probably feels undermined and a bit frustrated. The outgoing CEO is also frustrated, the CEO who stepped down is also frustrated because they've got ideas, but they don't have the power anymore. And it's a situation without any winner. If the CEO who stepped down remains involved in the business in some capacity, and they want to stay involved, they really need to negotiate with the new CEO how exactly it's going to work. What are going to be the boundaries, responsibilities, who is going to do what and why and when. And if there is this clarity, and if the outgoing CEO has enough restraint to really accept that they're not running the business anymore, it can work really well. But I know that for many people, it can be really difficult to see that someone else is running their business in a different way. And in those situations, maybe the best solution is to just have a very clean break, leave completely, give up access to all company systems, change your email address, and focus on the next stage of your professional career.
Yeah, we're just working through one of these projects at the moment with an outgoing CEO who is doing it in plenty of time, and he's been amazing and very proactive. But also, I think there is the emotional attachment to the business. When you founded or co-found a business, it's almost like a child to some people, and to your point, I think trying to make that decision earlier on is far better rather than far easier. But trying to choose my words wisely, because even if you know you've got to do it, doesn't make it an easy thing to do, particularly when that's been your life for a decade or more. Really interesting, and I could probably talk for hours just on that topic, as I'm sure you can, but I'm mindful of your time. So we talked a little bit about, and you mentioned a great book. What about any other sort of support systems or frameworks or methodologies that you've found over your time, both as a CEO and a coach, that you'd like to share with people that have helped you either navigate challenges or become a better leader? Anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah. A few things come to mind. One is a support network of other entrepreneurs who are going through the same journey. The experience of building a startup and being a CEO in particular can feel really lonely. It can feel like you're surrounded by other people all the time, but somehow it feels like you're alone on the inside. Yeah. Having a network of people you can rely on in various ways, and it can be good non-executive directors, a healthy functioning board, a good chair of the board that you can trust, a coach that you are seeing on a regular basis, friends who are entrepreneurs who are also going through similar challenges and that you can go and have a drink with on a regular basis. All of this makes a difference. Another thing which I think is really important is remembering that the business is not 100% of your life. And it's very tempting to feel like, oh my God, my startup has 4 weeks of the 4-week runway and everything is urgent, and that's the only thing that I'm going to focus on, and I'm going to ignore my relationship, my health, my exercise, my rest, and so on. But such an emergency mode, it can only last for so long. If we neglect other areas of our life, if we don't look after ourselves in a more holistic way, eventually we might get to a burnout or feeling like we've got no other choice but to leave the business because we just can't do it anymore. And I remember there were days when I was running Makers when I would come to the office in the morning probably being at some stage of burnout and feeling like you could kill me on the spot. I will not be able to do any work today. Just feeling physically unable to look at my inbox or making decisions, and just looking around and realizing that I'm technically here, but I'm completely useless. And that's not the point that anyone should get to. So looking after ourselves and making sure that we are in a good place in general, that we are doing good work in the office, yes, but we're also looking after our relationship, after our families, after extended social network, after our health. All of this is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I think for some founders, it's too late when you start to learn that lesson. Not too late. You become unwell, and that's the body's way of telling you that something's got to give. One question I'd like to ask is, given your experience of both being CEO and in leadership role and coaching CEOs as you do, how would you personally describe success?
I would say that The answer is very personal and unique to each of us. For me, personally, it's a sense of balance and contentment. That my life is, for me, success is feeling that things are okay in all areas of my life. I don't need all the money in the world. I need enough for my needs.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to optimize my health to be the healthiest person in the world, but it's important for me to be healthy enough, to have good relationships, to have calm and peaceful mind, to be able to go to sleep at the end of the day without any undue worries and not wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning feeling like I'm so worried I can't go back to sleep. And whatever the circumstances of our lives, just feeling like I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes things go our way, sometimes things really don't go our way, but our attitude towards them is a whole different dimension. We can look at objectively difficult circumstances of life and still feel like, okay, it's workable. It's okay, I'll navigate it. I can handle it.
Yeah.
And likewise, we can have objectively really positive situation and feel like it's not enough, it should be different, it should be better, bigger, or somehow superior in some way. So yes, we need to work on practical aspects of our lives, of course, but how we relate to our reality, how we experience ourselves, how content we are with whatever is happening is also a huge factor.
Yeah. So that's from a sort of personal perspective. And again, I'm thinking about those people who are listening and those who are probably navigating. They're either at that scale up and they're in the throes of it, or they can hopefully see it on the horizon. Is there a piece or a couple of pieces of advice that you'd give someone who is in that situation, both personally, but about building a culture, which clearly you built a very positive culture in Makers Academy, and also about leading people?
My piece of advice would be to work on yourself more than anything else. When we focus on our own self-awareness, on our own past, on our own emotional triggers, on our own fears and insecurities, and we learn how to be with all of this, how to address all of this, we will become better leaders almost as a side effect. Yes, there are practical skills that we need to learn, and all of this is good, but so much dysfunction in the workplace comes back to some unprocessed stuff inside the leaders of the organization.
Yeah.
And I think by and large, in our business culture, we really underestimate the importance of working ourselves, of self-awareness, of working with our own psychological material. Even though people have been writing books and articles about all of this for decades, I think we still have a long way to go.
Oh,
Everyone
yes.
wants to talk about strategy, and no one wants to talk about what's going on in their mind when they can't fall asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. And it comes back to even going back to school. Children are taught, you read, you write, you do maths, obviously a lot more and lots of other subjects, but it's the hard skills that we're taught. And yes, we've moved forward a little bit in society, but not that much. I have 3 children who are all young adults, and whilst they're all far more self-aware, but these skills, self-awareness, isn't taught enough. I don't believe that there's not enough tools that are shared for them to understand themselves. I think that's where it starts.
Yeah, soft skills are important, and in a way, soft skills are hard. Yeah. It's not easy, but it's so much worth focusing on it.
Yeah, and I think that sounds like it's your superpower.
Not quite yet, but I'm working on it.
You're working on it. So that looking ahead now, what's on the horizon for you? Obviously, coaching was something that was really important to you, and that's part of your. Let's talk about work. What else? What do you think the future might hold for you? What are your plans?
In the last few months, in the last couple of years, really, I've been drawn more and more towards artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I think it could be another podcast episode or several. But in short, I do believe that AI is going to have a very profound influence on many aspects of our lives, at work and outside work. And much of my attention is going into what's happening in that world, and in particular, what it means to build a business in an AI first way. Because all our playbooks to build businesses have been written in the world of slow and expensive intelligence. And slow and expensive intelligence is people like you and I. But going forward, the businesses will be built in the world of fast, cheap, ubiquitous, and extremely affordable intelligence.
Yes.
Based on the latest advances in AI. And this will require different approaches, different playbooks. So a lot of my attention recently has been going into that.
And it's so interesting again, and we could probably, I'm sure, have a quite deep, almost philosophical discussion about we've talked a lot about self-awareness and being human. And then we've got AI and how we will blend those going forward and the impact AI will have on us as human beings. I think that is a huge discussion, and one that I think about often, as I'm sure you do.
Maybe one for the future episode.
Yeah, I'll take you up on that. I do spend lots of time, sadly, in the evenings pondering that and weekends. But just a closing insight, or just one question. If there's one myth that you would like to bust about scaling a business, what would that one myth like to be?
I think there is a myth that it's supposed to work like this. First, you are validating your assumption, and then some magical day happens, and you figure out how it's supposed to work, and then you just throw money into sales and marketing, and the rest automatically scales 10x. In my experience and the experience of many founders I worked with, it's a far more messy, difficult, and convoluted process of learning to grow and learn and grow and make new mistakes at every scale, at every stage of the scaling process. Yes, mistakes can be different. Yes, the challenges are different, but I don't think it often happens that a magical day arrives when it's just about scaling by throwing money at the sales and marketing, and the rest just happens automatically. It's much more messy.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's lots of forward and backwards, left and right. I always find that question really interesting, and I'm intrigued to see if there is a theme when I ask that question in terms of what comes through from different people that I interview. And so far, there's a little theme coming through. That's interesting. So I'm going to draw it to a close there, and a really big thank you for spending an hour with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm absolutely confident that there are lots of gems in there that people can take away and that will be useful, given they're from someone who's got the experience and insights that you've got. Thank you from me, and thank you for your time and good afternoon.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. If you got value from today's conversation, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. It helps us bring even more real stories your way. Got a scale up challenge, a story to share, or want to recommend someone that I might interview? Take a look at the link below. Until next time, keep scaling, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone in your scaling journey.